Right now, you feel like you exist, not just that the body is here, not just that the brain is running. There's a you behind it, a presence, an insight, something it feels like to be right now, in this moment, reading these words. That feeling is so constant, so total, so woven into every instant of experience that questioning it seems almost pointless. Of course you exist. Of course there's something it feels like to be you. What kind of question is that? Here's what kind. Physics, the most successful description of reality humans have ever produced, has no place for it. Every equation that works, every prediction that holds, every experiment that confirms a theory, none of them contain a variable for the feeling of existing. None of them describe what it's like to be inside a system. The equations describe matter, energy, fields, forces. They describe what things do. They say nothing about what it feels like to be a thing. That gap between everything physics can describe and the single most immediate fact of your existence is not a small technical problem waiting to be cleaned up. It may be the largest gap in human knowledge. And it's been sitting there, largely unacknowledged, for the entire history of science. Let's look at it directly. Physics is extraordinarily successful. I want to be clear about that before going further. It predicted antimatter before anyone observed it. It described the curvature of spacetime decades before we could measure it directly. It mapped the behavior of particles at scales so small that the word small barely applies. The equations work. They're tested constantly against reality. They hold. But here's what every physics equation has in common. They describe systems from the outside. They describe behavior, what particles do, how fields evolve, how systems change over time. They are written in third person. They describe what can be observed from outside a system, not what it's like to be inside one. There is no equation for the redness of red, no formula for the feeling of a memory returning, no term in any Lagrangian that corresponds to the specific quality of what it's like to hear your name spoken in a quiet room. Experience is first person. Physics is third person. And the gap between those two perspectives isn't a gap in data, it's a gap in kind. David Chalmers named this the hard problem of consciousness. And it's worth being precise about why it's hard. Because it's not hard in the way quantum field theory is hard. It's hard in a structural sense. The problems neuroscience can in principle solve, how the brain processes visual information, how it integrates signals from different senses, how it generates behavior, are technically difficult. But you can imagine what a complete solution would look like. You can imagine a complete wiring diagram of the brain, a complete account of every signal, every neurotransmitter, every feedback loop. That solution would be spectacular, and it would still leave the central question untouched. Because even with a complete account of every neuron firing, every synapse crossing, every computational process in the brain, you still wouldn't have explained why any of that is accompanied by experience, why it feels like something, why there's an insight to the process at all. That's not a gap that more neuroscience fills. It's a different kind of gap. Here's what modern neuroscience does tell us, and it's genuinely remarkable. The brain is not a passive receiver of information, it's a prediction machine. Constantly, seamlessly, it generates models of what's about to happen, of what the world looks like, sounds like, feels like, and compares incoming signals to those predictions. What it calls experience isn't the world directly, it's the brain's best current model of the world, assembled from prediction and correction, running faster than you can notice. What you see right now is not the room as it is. It's the brain's prediction of the room, corrected by incoming light. What you hear is not sound. It's the brain's model of what's making the sound, adjusted by the acoustic signal. Everything you experience is constructed, assembled, built. This explains so much. Optical illusions, the prediction wins over the data. Phantom limbs, the brain's model of the body persists even when the body changes. Hallucinations, the prediction runs completely uncorrected. The way your name jumps out of a noisy room, the prediction system is scanning for it specifically. The brain is a model-building machine, and experience is what it's like to run that model. But, and here's the problem that doesn't go away, it still doesn't explain why running the model feels like anything. Why isn't the brain just running its prediction engine in the dark? Processing, updating, adjusting, with no experiential quality, no inside, no what it's like. The mechanism is brilliant, the mystery is untouched. The most mathematically rigorous attempt to solve this comes from Giulio Tononi. His integrated information theory proposes something precise. Consciousness is identical to integrated information. Not just any information processing, but a specific kind, where the system as a whole contains more information than the sum of its parts. He measures this with a value called phi. High phi means high consciousness. Low phi means low or no consciousness. The theory makes predictions. It can, in principle, be tested. It gives you a number, phi, that tells you how conscious something is. But it has a consequence that most people aren't ready for. If consciousness is integrated information, if phi is what determines whether something is conscious, then consciousness isn't limited to brains. Any system with sufficiently integrated information processing has experience, to some degree. Simple organisms, possibly some computers, possibly, and this is the part that restructures your intuitions, the internet itself, if its information integration crosses some threshold. The theory doesn't explain why only brains are conscious. It says consciousness is wherever integration is. That's either a profound truth about the nature of reality, or a sign that the theory has gone somewhere it shouldn't. Depending on who you ask, you get both answers. Which brings me to an idea that sounds ancient, but is being taken seriously by serious people right now. Panpsychism. The idea that experience isn't something that appears at a certain level of complexity, that it's a fundamental feature of reality, present in some form at every level of nature. I know how that sounds, but the argument for it is surprisingly hard to dismiss. If you start with matter that has no experiential quality at all, particles with mass and charge and spin, nothing more, and you build up complexity, at what point does experience appear? Where exactly does the transition happen? What is the mechanism by which non-experiential ingredients produce something experiential? Nobody has answered that. Every attempt to derive experience from non-experiential matter has failed to close the gap. The panpsychist says, maybe experience was never absent. Maybe it's fundamental, like mass, like charge, present at the base level, becoming more complex and integrated as systems become more complex and integrated. The experience of an electron, if it has any, would be unimaginably simple. Almost nothing, but it's not nothing. And as you build up from that all the way to a human brain with 86 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections, the complexity of experience scales with the complexity of the system. Philip Goff, Christof Koch and others hold versions of this view. They're not mystics. They're people who looked at the alternatives and found them more problematic. Now add quantum mechanics. In the standard formulation, a quantum system exists in superposition, multiple possible states simultaneously, until it's measured. Measurement collapses the superposition to a single outcome. But the equations don't specify what counts as measurement. They don't say whether a measuring device is enough or whether it requires a conscious observer. Most physicists adopt interpretations that avoid requiring consciousness for collapse. But the question isn't fully resolved. John Wheeler, one of the most serious physicists of the 20th century, developed what he called the participatory universe. The universe requires observers to give it definite reality. Not that observers create the universe, but that observation participates in bringing specific outcomes into existence. That's probably not the full story, but the fact that the most successful physical theory ever produced has an unresolved question about the role of the observer, and that question directly touches consciousness, is not something to wave away. Here's a specific puzzle that has no solution. Your experience right now feels unified, one coherent scene, one continuous stream, one you experiencing all of it, not a collection of parallel processes running separately, one unified experience. But your brain is not unified, it's a massively parallel distributed system. Dozens of regions processing different aspects of what you're experiencing. Color in one place, motion in another, sound somewhere else, meaning assembled across multiple areas simultaneously. There is no central location where it all converges, no headquarters, no screen where the unified experience is displayed. And yet it's unified. How? This is the binding problem. It's not the same as the hard problem, it's a specific instance of it, and it doesn't have a solution. We don't know how the brain produces unified experience from distributed processing. We don't know if solving that would explain why the experience feels like anything, or just relocate the mystery. Now I want to say something that rarely gets said directly. The fact that you feel like you exist, the fact that there's a what it's like to be you, is the reason any of this matters. Without experience, there's no suffering, no joy, no meaning, no loss, no beauty, no science, no love. Everything in the entire space of human value depends on the fact that experience exists, that someone is home, that there's an inside. And we don't know what that is. We don't know why experience exists. We don't know if it's fundamental or emergent. We don't know if it survives the death of the brain or ends with it. We don't know whether it's everywhere in some form or only in sufficiently complex systems. We don't know how to study it from the outside without losing the thing that makes it what it is. All of that, everything humans have cared about most deeply for the longest time, sits on a foundation we don't understand. After all of it, the neuroscience, the information theory, the quantum mechanics, the philosophy, the feeling of existing remains unexplained. Not mostly explained, not explained except for some details. The central fact is untouched. There is something it feels like to be you, right now, in this moment. That's the most certain thing you know. More certain than anything external. You can doubt the chair you're sitting on. You can doubt the screen in front of you. You cannot doubt that you're experiencing something. And that thing, the thing you cannot doubt, is what science understands least. The first fact, the last mystery. And I think the only honest position, the only intellectually courageous response, is to hold that open, not to fill it with false certainty in either direction, not to pretend physics has solved it, not to pretend religion has solved it, to sit with the fact that the universe produced something that can ask why it feels like anything at all, and hasn't answered yet.